If you're a man who values creating truly meaningful, intimate experiences, you understand there's a substantial difference between an adequate encounter and one that creates deep satisfaction and lasting connection for both partners. Today, we are exploring a principle that can consistently elevate the quality of intimate moments. We're moving past the common, rushed approaches that many people instinctively use based on assumptions rather than understanding, and examining the physiological science of gradual stimulation and the neurological pathways that create extraordinary experiences. My focus today is on one straightforward yet highly effective concept that transforms basic technique into genuine connection: the slow hand technique. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Charlotte Hayes, and welcome to a discussion that may fundamentally change how you approach intimate connection. What I'm about to share with you isn't about shortcuts or gimmicks. This is about understanding the actual physiology of pleasure and working with your partner's nervous system rather than against it. Imagine this. You have a musical instrument that is capable of producing the most incredible soaring symphony with layers of harmony and resonance that move listeners deeply. Most people, when handed this instrument, would frantically play the keys with increasing force and speed, producing only loud, chaotic noise that might be impressive in volume, but lacks any real beauty or depth. But a true maestro, with deliberate, controlled, and measured movements, brings out every nuance of potential from that instrument, building the music note by note, phrase by phrase, until it reaches an overwhelming, perfect crescendo that seems to fill the entire concert hall with sound and emotion. That instrument represents the human body, with its intricate network of nerve pathways, vascular structures, and muscular systems, all designed to work in perfect coordination. And the slow hand technique represents the maestro's understanding of exactly how to bring out every aspect of that magnificent instrument's capabilities. Many people mistakenly believe that increased speed and intensity are the direct routes to elevated pleasure, operating under the assumption that more force and faster movement automatically equals better results. They approach intimate moments with a sense of urgency, almost like they're in a race, increasing stimulation intensity rapidly in an attempt to reach a peak quickly and efficiently. Physiologically, this approach often produces suboptimal results in multiple ways. The sensitive neural pathways, which contain some of the highest concentrations of nerve endings in the human body, can become overloaded with sensation, leading to reduced responsiveness, where the nerves essentially decrease their sensitivity to protect themselves from overstimulation. Alternatively, the experience can simply feel mechanical, disconnected, or even uncomfortable rather than deeply connecting and pleasurable. The resulting response, while technically present, is often brief and less satisfying, leaving a significant amount of potential pleasure completely unrealized. The scientific reality, supported by extensive research in neurology and physiology, is that profound, intimate experiences, particularly those described as deep, comprehensive, or involving the entire body, rely fundamentally on the cumulative buildup of neurological signals and the strategic rhythmic engagement of the entire nervous system rather than just isolated nerve clusters. When the body is given adequate time, when the pleasure is carefully controlled, skillfully modulated, and gradually amplified through deliberate technique, the neural feedback loop between the stimulated area and the brain intensifies exponentially rather than linearly. This progressive intensification allows the body to fully recruit the various muscle groups throughout the entire pelvic region, engage the deeper nerve pathways that extend into the spinal column, and activate the vascular responses that create the physical sensations that enhance the overall experience. All of these systems working in coordination lead to responses that can feel dramatically deeper, longer lasting, and more satisfying than rushed ones that only engage surface level reactions. This comprehensive whole body engagement is how we achieve experiences that feel significantly more intense, satisfying, and memorable. The slow hand technique is defined by three fundamental interconnected principles that work together to create this extraordinary result: initial control, gradual amplification, and strategic modulation. Each of these principles is based on understanding how the nervous system processes pleasure signals and how to work with those natural processes rather than overwhelming them. Let's first address initial control in comprehensive detail, because this is where most people make their first critical mistake. When initiating touch, particularly in sensitive areas, the hand should be deliberate, gentle, and significantly slower than what instincts suggest. The pace should be consciously reduced to perhaps one-third of what feels natural or intuitive. This is not about being passive, tentative, or uncertain. It is about being precise, intentional, and controlled. Sensitive areas contain extraordinarily high concentrations of nerve endings in relatively small spaces. To put this in perspective, the density of sensory receptors in these areas is remarkable, and rushing these initial sensations is like playing music at maximum volume from the very first note. You completely miss the subtle nuance and building anticipation that creates truly memorable experiences. The slow hand technique requires that the first 3 to 5 minutes of any focused stimulation be extremely gradual, exploratory, and distributed across the entire area rather than concentrated on a single point. This initial phase should use the flat of the fingers, not just the pointed fingertips, to introduce sensation gradually across a wider surface area. The broader contact distributes the stimulation and prevents the overwhelming intensity that can come from concentrated pressure on densely packed nerve endings. The pace during this initial phase should be so measured that it creates pleasant anticipation and allows the nerves to register every aspect of contact without experiencing sensory overload that triggers protective responses. This initial slow phase serves multiple physiological purposes beyond just pleasant sensation. It allows blood flow to increase gradually to the area, beginning the process of vascular changes that make tissue more sensitive and responsive. It gives the brain time to fully register and process the incoming pleasure signals, creating a strong mind-body connection. It allows the body's natural responses to develop appropriately. And perhaps most importantly, it establishes trust and communication between partners, signaling that this experience will be about quality and attention rather than rushed completion. The pressure during this initial phase should be extremely light, barely more than a whisper of touch. Think of it as introducing yourself to the tissue rather than announcing your presence forcefully. The motion should be varied, circular movements, side-to-side gliding, gentle vertical strokes to stimulate the nerve endings from different angles and prevent them from adapting to a single predictable pattern. This variety keeps the nervous system engaged and responsive, rather than becoming accustomed to repetitive stimulation. The second principle, and perhaps most crucial to achieving significantly enhanced experiences, is gradual amplification. Once the initial area is thoroughly sensitized and arousal is clearly established through observable signs like increased breathing rate, subtle body movements, or vocal responses, the pace and pressure should increase, but always in small, measured, incremental steps that build upon each other. Think of a volume dial that you turn one notch at a time, not a switch that jumps from low to maximum. You are gradually turning up the sensation in a way that the nervous system can track and integrate rather than being overwhelmed by sudden changes. This amplification should be rhythmic, consistent, and continuous without erratic changes or unpredictable variations. The motion should remain fundamentally constant in its pattern and location, but the speed should increase perhaps by only 10 to 15% every 60 to 90 seconds. This measured progression, which requires significant patience and discipline to maintain, allows the pelvic floor muscles to begin their natural rhythmic responses progressively. It allows the body's neurochemical responses to build up gradually in the system without triggering an immediate premature response that interrupts the building process. The goal here is to sustain a high level of carefully controlled engagement for an extended duration of 10 to 15 minutes or even longer. This sustained elevation of arousal is what recruits the deeper nerve centers in the spinal column and brain, creating the neurological foundation for comprehensive responses that engage far more than just local sensation. Crucially, gradual amplification is where the ability to maintain consistent, intentional, controlled movement becomes absolutely vital, and where many people struggle because it requires overriding strong instinctive urges. The natural tendency, as you observe your partner's arousal increasing, is to accelerate dramatically, matching the apparent urgency of their responses with increased intensity of stimulation. The slow hand technique requires conscious, deliberate resistance against that tendency. Instead of doubling or tripling the speed in response to increased arousal, which is what instinct suggests, focus on increasing the depth or pressure of the rhythmic motion very slightly, ensuring that the touch remains connected to the entire sensitive area and does not become isolated or fixated on just one tiny specific spot that can quickly become less responsive or even uncomfortable from concentrated attention. This is also the phase where reading and responding to subtle feedback becomes essential. You're looking for signs of building engagement, muscles beginning to respond, breathing becoming more rapid or irregular, sounds or movements that indicate increasing pleasure. These signs tell you that your gradual amplification is effective and should continue at its measured pace. If you notice any signs of discomfort, pulling away, or decreased responsiveness, you may have accelerated too quickly and need to reduce slightly and spend more time at the current intensity level before progressing further. Maintaining this measured incremental increase in intensity, never allowing it to become rapid or rushed, is the absolute key to unlocking maximum pleasure potential and creating an experience that feels fundamentally different in quality, not just degree. The difference between adequate stimulation and extraordinary stimulation often comes down to this patience and control during the amplification phase. The third principle is strategic modulation, and this is the advanced technique that truly distinguishes a good experience from one that feels significantly more intense and satisfying. As the partner approaches their peak, that point where the reflexes begin to take over and completion seems imminent, most people instinctively continue with maximum intensity, maintaining or even increasing the stimulation. The slow hand technique does precisely the opposite, and this counterintuitive approach is where remarkable results occur. For a brief yet critical period of approximately 20 to 45 seconds, the speed and pressure should be subtly but definitively reduced by perhaps 30 to 50%. This is a decrease in intensity, not a complete cessation of all stimulation. The touch continues, the rhythm continues, but the intensity decreases noticeably. The intention is to bring the partner right up to the edge of response, and then, for a carefully timed moment, reduce the intensity just enough to prevent the response from happening immediately, while maintaining enough stimulation to keep them at that heightened state. Physiologically, this brief modulation creates a fascinating cascade of effects. It allows the central nervous system to adjust slightly from its peak activation, preventing the premature triggering of reflexive responses. Meanwhile, the surrounding vascular tissue remains highly engaged. The muscles remain in a state of elevated tension, and the neurological arousal remains intensely elevated. The body is essentially suspended in a state of maximum readiness without being allowed to discharge that accumulated tension. When the stimulation is then gently resumed and gradually amplified again after this brief but strategic modulation, following the same gradual progression as before, the accumulated tension is not released and reset, but rather compounded and built upon. The nervous system, having been brought to the edge once, is now even more sensitized and responsive. The second approach to the peak builds upon the neurological and physical tension of the first approach, creating a layering effect where each cycle adds to the total arousal rather than starting fresh. This layering effect, bringing them to the edge through gradual amplification, moderating the intensity strategically just before completion, allowing a brief adjustment period, and then resuming and building again, is what enables the body to reach a significantly higher and deeper peak than would be possible with a single linear progression. This technique is what makes the profound difference in the perceived intensity, duration, and quality of the eventual response, creating that powerful, comprehensive experience that engages every muscle group in the pelvic region and creates waves of sensation that extend throughout the entire body rather than remaining localized. This process of gradual amplification followed by strategic modulation can be repeated 2, 3, or even 4 times for partners who have the patience and desire for extended intimate encounters. Each cycle builds upon the cumulative tension of the previous ones, creating an exponential rather than linear increase in potential intensity. The first modulation might be met with some surprise at being brought back from the edge, but as the pattern continues and the intensity of sensation increases with each cycle, the partner typically becomes more receptive to and appreciative of this building technique. This sustained period of carefully controlled arousal over 15 to 30 minutes or longer is what unlocks the deeper muscular engagement throughout the entire core, the activation of the more profound nerve pathways in the spinal column, and the potential for responses that are far more intense, longer lasting, and potentially capable of multiple peaks, rather than a single brief response. The body is essentially being guided to fully express its complete potential, rather than simply being rushed into a quick, surface-level response that engages only the most superficial reflexes. This is the difference between a simple reaction and a full expression, between a basic response and a comprehensive experience. Furthermore, the slow hand technique fundamentally shifts the focus and energy of the experience from what might feel like a performance or goal-oriented endeavor to an act of detailed, attentive communication between partners. By observing and responding to the subtle physical responses, the slightest change in breathing pattern, the barely perceptible movements, the subtle shifts in body position, the quiet sounds or held breaths, you become a more attuned, present, and connected participant rather than someone simply executing a mechanical technique. This observation and responsiveness requires patience, presence, sustained focus, and genuine care for your partner's experience, and those qualities enhance connection for both partners. When the focus shifts from personal performance metrics to the quality of the shared interaction and your partner's genuine pleasure, the experience becomes mutually rewarding on both physical and emotional levels, and the physiological outcomes are enhanced by this psychological safety and connection. The application of this technique requires understanding how to use the entire hand, not just isolated fingertips that can create concentrated pressure. Using the flat of multiple fingers simultaneously, incorporating the palm for broader pressure when appropriate, and including gentle, broad motions around the sensitive tissue ensures that the stimulation is widely distributed across the nerve-rich area and avoids the localized reduced responsiveness that comes from repetitive stimulation of the exact same spot with the same pressure and rhythm for extended periods. The pressure should be consistent and sufficient to engage the underlying vascular tissue and structures beneath the surface, creating that sense of depth and internal engagement, but never harsh, aggressive, or uncomfortable in any way. The goal is to